Tonight on Primetime Politics, tough words as the public sector strike enters a sixth day.
The PSAC continues to insist on demands that are unaffordable.
Both the Public Service Alliance and the Treasury Board accuse each other of failing to communicate. Where do the two sides stand? Coming up, we will speak to Union Leader Chris Aylward. Also,
Canadians are now told they're not even to apply for passports.
Negotiations are ongoing.
As the work stoppage enters a second week, what impact will the strike have on the services Canadians rely on? The Minister for Families, Children and Social Development, Karina Gould, will join us on the program. And
there is a role for government to fix this imbalance and help ensure that passengers are protected.
The Transport Minister is promising amendments to strengthen the Passenger Bill of Rights. But how is the airline industry responding, and will the changes prevent long delays and cancelled flights? We will speak to the Transport Minister himself. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. As public sector workers continue their nationwide strike, the language is getting heated. The union accusing the government of incompetence and both sides accusing each other of failing to communicate. The Public Service Alliance of Canada did intensify strike action today, with port workers walking off the job in a few cities. That gave the opposition fodder with which to attack the government.
It'd be one thing to increase the cost of the bureaucracy by 50% or $20 billion a year. It would be another to have a strike. But to do both of those things at once takes a special, unique kind of incompetence that only this Prime Minister could pull off. But the consequences are that 700 soldiers have been without heat and warm water. Canadians are now told they're not even to apply for passports, let alone get one, meaning that they'll miss international weddings. Our veterans, our seniors, our small businesses, our taxpayers are all being ripped off. Now, how much are they going to have to pay to bring an end to the Prime Minister's cause strike?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, public servants from the PSAC provide important services to Canadians, and the government values their work. We are committed to reaching agreements that are fair for employees and also reasonable to Canadians. There is a competitive deal on the table, but the PSAC continues to insist on demands that are unaffordable and would severely impact our ability to deliver services to Canadians. Now, Canadians can expect both parties to bargain in good faith and find compromise. That is what we are focusing on, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
For an update on the PSAC strike, we're now joined by the National President, Chris Aylward. Chris, thank you for coming to the studio.
My pleasure, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin here with what we just heard there from Mona Fortier in the House of Commons today, essentially saying that there is right now what she considers a competitive deal on the table and that your union continues to make unaffordable demands.
Mm-hmm. To whom? It would be my question. Workers need a fair wage increase in this country. We've said all along, we want to make sure that our members at least stay in line with the rate of inflation. Our members, the vast majority of our members, make between $40,000 and $65,000 a year. That's a salary that cannot suffer another rollback, and that's what the minister is suggesting. And we're saying we need to see wages that are, keep our members in line with the rate of inflation. Every single worker in this country deserves a fair and decent wage increase. Workers in this country are fed up, as we've been saying. So as much as, yes, the employer has 9% on the table, we're saying, and we've compromised on our wage demand. We've dropped below 13.5% over the 3 years. And just to remind that that 13.5% over the 3 years that we're asking for that same period, the rate of inflation is at 13.8%. So we believe that, again, our wage demand, which we've compromised and we've come down on, is still fair, decent. It's fair to workers in this country, and it would also be fair to taxpayers. Because when you put more money in workers' pockets, they don't squirrel it away in some offshore bank account. They go out in their communities and they spend that money, and that's good for the economy. As I said, workers are just fed up. Corporations are making record profits, but yet everybody wants to repress the wages of workers. And when the federal government does that, they're repressing wages for everyone in the country.
Okay, down from 13.5. Can you say where you're at now then?
We've compromised. We've lowered our wage demand because that's what has to happen at the negotiating table. So we've compromised on our wage demand, and we need to see a wage offer from the government that's better than the current one they currently have on the table.
Now, I appreciate that a strike is stressful for members. It's stressful on the union, certainly for the employer as well. But over the weekend, you called Mona Fortier incompetent. Do you regret that?
Look, we gave the employer on Thursday evening a comprehensive package that we thought we could get to a deal on. On Friday morning, the employer responded saying, we will respond to this today. They didn't respond all day Friday night, Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. We still not had heard anything from the employer. So yes, the bargaining team members were extremely frustrated. They were waiting for the employer for more than 30 hours to respond. How can the employer explain that with over 100,000 federal public sector workers out on picket lines? And yet they take over 30 hours to respond on one of the issues, because that's what they had signaled. They would be responding on one issue. It took them over 30 hours. Yeah, the frustration level did get a little high on Saturday after we had heard nothing from the employer. And then we called the media scrum for 1:15, and the mediator tried to rush us in the room after waiting for more than 30 hours, then tried to rush us into a room at 1 o'clock to preempt the media scrum. So as soon as the employer had learned of our media scrum at 1:15, they tried to meet with us at 1 o'clock, and we're like, we're sorry, we're busy, we'll meet you at 1:30. So again, yes, frustrations certainly were up there a little bit on the weekend, but as I said, with over 100,000 of our members out on strike, we should not be waiting around for more than 30 hours for the employer to respond on one issue.
How are your members feeling right now? When you and I spoke initially on Wednesday, you said people were feeling very supportive, but subsequently since then, we heard from the Labour Board, this. They say that there were irregularities in the strike vote. They say that at the end of the day, less than 30% of members actually cast a ballot on a strike. How are you feeling about the support within your union for this job action?
Look, I mean, as far as the turnout of the members, we said after we released the results that we had overwhelming support. The board said in that same report that there was overwhelming support for this strike. So our members, they didn't vote yes, they didn't vote no, they didn't go vote at all, but they're voting with their feet because they showed up last week and they showed up today on the picket lines. And that's what we look to. Certainly, and some of those irregularities that the board is talking about, one of them, for example, is that when you come into a strike vote, you have to listen to a very short presentation of about 15 or 20 minutes, because we want to make sure the members understand exactly what's at stake here, and they understand what we're going on strike for. So that was one of the irregularities that the board had indicated. We don't think that's an irregularity. We believe that's giving our members an opportunity to have a good understanding and make an informed decision before they vote yes or no.
Now, to my understanding, the last time the PSAC went on strike, decades ago, it was about a 3 to 4 week strike. You have, correct me if I'm wrong here, about $200 million in your strike fund. How long can you carry on this job action for?
Michael, the strike pay is not an issue. It is not a concern at all for PSAC. We want the strike to end, though. We do not want to keep our members out on strike, and that's why we're asking the government to come to the table with a new mandate, sit down and negotiate so that we can make some progress, end the strike for our members and end the strike for Canadians, because our members provide the service, of course, that they depend on every day.
So at this point, the ball is in the government's court, you think?
Yes, it is, very much so.
So your last offer went in at what time?
Our last pass was made, I believe it was yesterday evening. We have received nothing from the employer.
Okay. Again, as you say, the strike pay is not there, but from your members, how long, how willing are they going to be on the pickets for? Yeah,
look, I mean, our members, they showed up. They showed up when we asked them last week. We're on strike again today. Our members escalated their actions today. I'm sure you're going to see more escalated actions tomorrow. The members are there. They understand. We have their backs to get them a good collective agreement. And obviously they're demonstrating that they have our backs as well to make sure that we stay at the table. We fight for a fair deal that includes good working conditions and a fair and decent wage increase.
Quickly losing time here, but I do want to ask you, Chris, because it's been said that going into any election, every party right now is courting the workers' vote. Worker W, not Labor L, but the workers' vote. How important do you think this is for the government to settle this? How do you think members and the public will judge the government if this is not settled quickly?
Look, I think the government wants this settled. The minister, in an open letter, laid out for the first time our priority issues that are still outstanding. So I think that's a good signal that when the minister that's responsible for these negotiations lays it out in an open letter to say, here are the priorities that are still at the table, I think that's a good signal in that they want to get to a deal as well. They want to resolve these issues and get to a deal, and that's what we want.
Chris Aylward, thank you for the time.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
With more on the public sector strike and how it's affecting government services, we're now joined by Karina Gould, Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Minister Gould, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here, Michael.
Now, last week on the first day of the strike, you noted that some services would remain, those deemed essential, but to also prepare for impact. So here we are, day 6. I'm wondering, how has this strike affected essential services so far?
Yeah, it's a good question, an important one. So first of all, essential services like employment insurance, the Canada Pension Plan, old age security, guaranteed income supplement, and social insurance numbers continue to be issued and to be provided. And the government is focusing on ensuring that Canadians their payments are prioritized. But that means that there are delays in assessments or when Canadians try to contact call centres because the workforce in those areas have been reduced. And really the biggest impact that we've seen is on passports because unfortunately under the law, passports are not considered to be an essential service in Canada except in urgent and humanitarian cases.
Urgent and humanitarian cases. Can you give some examples of what would qualify for passport help?
Certainly. So it's very limited in this circumstance when there's a general strike that again is outlined in law. So there's a couple of examples. So first of all, if you are dependent on your livelihood to travel and require a passport to do so and would be economically disadvantaged if you weren't able to travel for work because you didn't have a passport, if you need to seek medical care abroad, if you have a loved one that is critically or terminally ill abroad, or you have a loved one that unfortunately has passed away, and then in some other very specific humanitarian instances.
So now that there are PSAC workers on strike, who actually can help this list of people with passports?
So there will be, a very limited number of passport officers at passport offices across the country who were deemed essential in order to support these applications during the general strike. And so if Canadians do require an urgent or humanitarian passport, then they need to go to a passport office or a consolidated passport office Service Canada site. They can't go to a regular Service Canada because they will not accept a passport application in that situation.
Is that frustrating for you? Given all the criticism that your department came under last year for not being able to process passports in a timely manner, here you are throwing resources, getting rid of that backlog not that long ago, and now this strike. How frustrating is that?
Well, look, I think it's frustrating for Canadians. Certainly we respect the collective bargaining process and we respect the right to strike. But, I can't lie to Canadians. I have to be honest with them that, every day that there's a strike is a day that impacts service delivery to Canadians, and passport being the one that is most affected at this point in time. And I know that, Canadians generally support the right to strike as well, but, they are, certainly impacted by this. And for folks who, kind of did everything right, they applied ahead of time, they thought that they were, within the time frame, of course, the strike, really impacts their ability to travel, and I think it's very unfortunate. Just a couple of months ago, we were able to officially announce that we had cleared through the entire backlog. So, one thing that I do want to reassure Canadians on is that we're in a much different space today when it comes to the passport program than we were a year ago. We have a lot more capacity in the system, and so once the strike is over, there will likely be a little bit of delay, but it won't be like what we saw last summer.
Mm-hmm. Now, negotiations are still ongoing, but there have been, as you know, some testy words exchanged over the weekend. Chris Aylward, the PSAC president, calling your colleague Mona Fortier incompetent. I'm wondering what's your reaction to that?
Well, look, I think it's important for both sides to look at and focus on what's important here, which I think is getting a negotiated agreement at the table. Certainly as a government, we have been there the entire time, and Minister Fortier has been working around the clock, particularly over the past 2 weeks, but long before then, to try and get a negotiated agreement. There's a very generous offer on the table, 9% over 3 years. My understanding is that the union came with over 570 demands, most of which an agreement has been reached on those. And so, certainly I hope that just as much as the government is committed to getting this negotiated agreement, I hope the union is as committed so that we can reduce the impact that this is having on everyday Canadians.
Mr. Aylward has called on the Prime Minister to intervene directly, perhaps to finally get that deal over a finish line. Do you think that would be worthwhile?
Look, I have full confidence in Minister Fortier on this. She's been leading these negotiations, and I would like to see a negotiated deal at the table, like everyone in our government. I think we hope that the union wants the same thing. There's a good deal on offer right now, and our job is to make sure that we are respecting, fairly compensating public servants who work really hard to serve Canadians, and we appreciate that and we see that, but we also have to make sure that we're maintaining the public interest of Canadian taxpayers as well. And I think we have put something on the table that addresses both of those issues, and certainly it's something that the Public Interest Commission has supported as well. So I really hope to be able to see an agreement come sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Quickly running out of time here, Minister, but I do wonder about pay, because there seems to be some question as to who is paying striking workers right now. Are workers in your department still getting a paycheck, or have those been suspended? Will pay be clawed back if paychecks are going out right now?
Well, that's a good question. So it will depend on the worker. So in my department, about 35% of the workers are considered essential, so they will continue to be paid by the department. However, as of Wednesday at midnight, anyone who is on strike will not be paid by the government. They will be receiving strike pay from the union.
Minister Gould, really appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To some other stories now that caught our eye today, beginning with the upcoming coronation. We are less than 2 weeks away from that ceremony, but new polling out today shows 2 in 5 Canadians do not care about the coronation at all. A majority of Canadians also do not want Charles recognized as King of Canada. And the Angus Reid Institute also says 2/3 of Canadians are opposed to Camilla becoming queen. Nearly half of the country says it is worthwhile to reopen the Constitution to cut ties with the monarchy altogether.
I just heard earlier today that a German plane lifted off from Khartoum with 1 German citizen on it and 58 Canadian citizens on it.
Well, that is the Prime Minister at an event with the Governor General and the President of Germany today. It's where Justin Trudeau gave an update on evacuation efforts from Sudan. He says a C-17 is in the region preparing to airlift Canadians. The government also waiving document fees for citizens and permanent residents who want to leave Sudan. Ottawa will also let Sudanese nationals in Canada apply to have their status extended. Fighting between Sudan's army and the RSF paramilitary force has killed hundreds of civilians. Millions more are sheltering without food, water, or power. And new developments on foreign interference allegations and the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. The Auditor General will not investigate donations with potential links to the Chinese government. Karen Hogan says she has no authority to look at private funding sources nor the identity and motivation of donors. Opposition parties and the foundation itself had wanted the probe. Meanwhile, the House Public Accounts Committee has agreed to hearings on the Trudeau Foundation, but the Prime Minister and family members will not be called as witnesses. The committee is also formally asking the CRA to investigate. More than 3 years ago, Canada's Air Passenger Bill of Rights came into force, a set of rules that gives passengers a way of seeking compensation for delayed or cancelled flights. But since its introduction in 2019, airlines have not always followed through on the compensation. So today, Omar Alghabra, the Transportation Minister, moved to tighten the rules, saying if passed, the amendments will take the onus off of passengers to prove they should be paid and put it on airlines to prove that they don't have to pay out. Well, we're now joined by the Federal Minister for Transportation, Omar Alghabra. Minister, thank you for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, a lot to talk about here. And, you know, when you look at these amendments, they are meant to strengthen passenger rights. It includes things like making compensation the default position. It calls on airlines to create a process to deal with claims and to respond within 30 days' time. How does that address the kind of backlogs that we've seen in airline complaints?
Look, Michael, we learned a lot of lessons from COVID and the recovery from COVID, where we saw many challenges in the airline sector. And we saw some vulnerabilities to the Passenger Bill of Rights that, by the way, our government introduced in 2019. And what I committed to Canadians is that to benefit from those lessons that we saw and to strengthen the Passenger Bill of Rights. Today, I explained to Canadians the new rules that will be put in place that will further protect passenger. So to your question about the CTA, look, the objective of these new rules is to reduce the number of grievances that passengers may have. And if airlines have a better sense of what the expectations are, they should work towards reducing the number of complaints. We're also creating incentives for airlines to avoid leaving the customer to go to the CTA for complaints, so they have an incentive to settle the grievance with the passenger before. So what we're doing is we're reducing the number of complaints, hopefully. We're ensuring that airlines fund the complaints that the passengers go to the CTA for. And we're simplifying the process for the CTA so the CTA is able to deal with these complaints in a much more efficient and faster way.
Okay, but you know, when we talk about the challenges that passengers have had to face, I'm thinking, for example, most recently the Christmas break, when we saw backlogs, we saw travel chaos. Weather certainly played a big part in what happened. Sick calls also played a part. How would these amendments introduced today tackle the challenges that left passengers stranded in airports for days?
So several things. First, the current rules provides a justification for airlines not to pay or compensate passenger if the reason for canceling or delaying a flight was safety. But what we learned is that there was some ambiguity what that means, because some airlines said we're short on staff, therefore we couldn't fly a plane because of safety. What we're saying, that is no longer acceptable, because the airlines are responsible for managing their staff, and therefore they should have enough staff on site to manage a plane. And therefore, if a flight was canceled because of staff shortage, they should be compensating passengers. Second, airlines should not be held accountable for bad weather, of course. And the most that they're responsible for is refunding passenger. But we're defining also a standard, a new service standard for airlines. So for example, if a weather disruption occurs, we're going to be setting clear expectation on the airlines of what type of service they need to provide to the customer, including perhaps access to meals or telecommunications. So we are making sure that, yes, bad weather will happen, and Canadians are accustomed to this, and they know that it happens, but they need to be dealt with dignity and respect and communication.
Okay, I'm wondering what you've heard from the airline industry about these changes. The amendments do put this greater onus on the companies financially. How have they responded to you?
Look, I mean, they predictably are not very happy with these new rules. I would argue they should be happy because now we're being very clear about the expectations. Look, here's the thing. Currently, there is an imbalance of power, an asymmetry of power between the passenger and the airlines. The passenger are in total control of what happens to the passenger, and we're seeing a lot of frustration. We are, as a government, trying to balance that asymmetry of power and making sure that passengers have recourse. If an airline takes this to heart, they can work with us on reducing the number of complaints, on improving their performance, and therefore reducing the number of grievances and reducing the number of fines they need to pay. So that's what I suspect a successful business, any successful business would do, and this will be good for customers, this would be good for airlines, and this would be good for our sector.
Okay, but does it put too much onus on the airlines, though? Because I'm thinking about Air Canada, WestJet, Sunwing. They appeared before that Commons Committee earlier this year. They argued that other industry players need to be held accountable as well. For example, if the issue is lost luggage or delayed luggage, where does an airport or airport authority's obligation lie? Or if there are delays boarding because of security, where does CATSA fit in? Should other bodies be involved in compensation as opposed to just the airline companies?
Sure, Michael. Let me just be very clear. When the circumstances are totally outside of the airline control, the most that the airline are responsible for is refund. Second, I acknowledge the fact that other stakeholders in the sector can play a role, and that's why the budget has actually put together a plan on how we can achieve a shared accountability system. We're talking about more information, shared information, which will enable airlines and airports to set a new service standard where if an airport, you talked about luggage, if an airport fails to deliver a certain expectation on their luggage infrastructure, then the airline can hold the airport accountable. That's the direction that we're moving to. But let me be very clear. It's the passenger who pays the airline for a service, and the airline should be held accountable for delivering that service, especially when it's within the control of the airline.
Okay, so details need to be worked out. In particular, I know you want to create a list of exemptions that would exempt the airline from these obligations. So how quickly will this new regime be in place?
Some of these measures will be implemented immediately as soon as the bill receives royal assent. Some of them will require regulatory changes that will start. We actually, I know the CTA, the Canadian Transportation Agency, is starting work on it right now. As soon as the bill receives royal assent, the regulatory process will launch. We will engage in consultation with stakeholders, with consumer advocates, and I'm hoping that the regulatory portion of these rules will be completed before the end of the year.
Minister Alghabra, thank you very much for the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
And that is our program for this Monday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow. Up next, Esther Bégin avec l'essentiel.